I never thought I'd live long enough to see my family name dragged through mud. At 55, I believed the hardest struggles of my life were behind me raising kids. Losing my parents and surviving the quiet loneliness of widowhood. But nothing could have prepared me for the storm that came the day my sister's husband vanished. And she walked away with every last dollar that didn't belong to her. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about resilience, about the strength you don't know you have until your back is pressed against the wall. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because if my story can save just one woman from making the mistakes I made, then all the scars on my heart will finally mean something. I grew up with one sister, Marlene. She was 3 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, the whole world seemed to bend toward her like flowers leaning into sunlight. I was the steady one, the helper, the daughter who kept the house in order when our mother fell ill. Marlene was the dreamer, the pretty one, the one who could charm her way out of any punishment. We were opposites, yet inseparable, or at least that's what I thought. By the time we both hit our 50s, life had carved us into very different women. I became a school teacher, married a quiet man named Frank, and raised 2 children who eventually gave me the joy of grandchildren. Marlene, meanwhile, had lived a dozen lives: secretary, real estate agent, yoga teacher, always chasing the next shiny thing. And then she met Charles. Charles was older than her by nearly 15 years. It's a wealthy contractor who built luxury homes along the coast. He was tall, handsome in that graying, distinguished way. And most importantly for Marlene, he had money. Within 6 months, they were married. I wanted to believe she had finally found stability, but deep down, I knew my sister too well. Stability bored her. It was a rainy Thursday when the phone rang. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when I saw Marlene's name flash across the screen. Her voice was trembling when I answered. "He's gone, Ellen," she whispered. My heart stopped. "Who's gone?" I asked, already fearing the answer. "Charles. He didn't come home last night. His car isn't in the driveway." I think she paused, sucking in a shaky breath. "I think something terrible has happened." At first, I panicked with her. Charles had been healthy, strong. A sudden disappearance didn't make sense. But when the police got involved, things grew stranger. His phone was off, his accounts untouched. No sightings, no credit card charges, nothing. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. The police treated it as a missing person case. They searched his office, his car, his construction sites. Weeks passed, then months, and still no Charles. But here's the part I didn't see coming. While the rest of us mourned and prayed for answers, Marlene started spending. She sold off his cars, liquidated assets, and cashed out accounts that by law weren't supposed to be touched until he was declared dead. She played the grieving widow for the neighbors, but behind closed doors, she redecorated her house, bought designer clothes, and even took trips to clear her mind. One afternoon, I confronted her. I was standing in her kitchen while she sipped champagne from a crystal glass. "Marlene," I asked, "how are you affording all this? Charles's accounts aren't. They've frozen." Her eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't you dare lecture me, Ellen. I'm his wife. I'm entitled. But he's not. He's not even declared dead yet. You don't know what happened to him?" I pushed. She leaned closer, her voice low and sharp. "Maybe I don't want to know." That's when it hit me like a blow to the chest. My sister didn't just lose her husband. She was profiting from his disappearance. It wasn't the first time Marlene had taken what wasn't hers. I thought back to when we were children, when our mother gave us both a single dollar to spend at the corner store. Marlene always found a way to come home with candy while I came home with nothing. She'd pout, she'd manipulate, she'd guilt me into handing her mine. And now, at 52 years old, she was doing the same thing on a grander scale. The stress of it all began to eat at me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. My husband had passed 5 years earlier, and now this betrayal from the only sibling I had left was tearing at my sanity. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with her, where she screamed that I was jealous of her life, I collapsed in my own home. The doctor called it stress-induced atrial fibrillation. My body was literally rebelling against the weight of secrets I carried as I lay in that hospital bed. Wires sticking to my chest, I asked myself a question that changed everything. Why am I the one paying the price for her greed? When I was discharged, I made myself a promise. I would not let my sister destroy what little peace I had left in life. If Charles was truly gone, the truth would come out. But if he wasn't and Marlene was hiding something, I would uncover it. And so I began to investigate. I dug into financial records. I spoke to Charles's business partners quietly without telling Marlene. I retraced the days before his disappearance. And the deeper I went, the darker the trail became. There were whispers of a mistress in another city. Rumors that Charles had debts no one knew about. And somewhere in that tangled web of secrets and lies, I began to see a terrifying possibility. Maybe Marlene wasn't just a grieving wife. Maybe she was part of the reason he vanished. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because this story is only beginning. And what comes next will shake everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and betrayal. The first real crack in Marlene's story came from a man named Victor, one of Charles's longtime business partners. I met him at a coffee shop 2 towns over where no one would recognize me. He was in his 60s, silver hair slicked back, the kind of man who had seen too much and trusted too little. When I asked about Charles, his eyes hardened. Charles was under pressure, he said, stirring his coffee without looking at me. Big debts. Bigger than Marlene probably ever knew. He'd been gambling, Ellen, and not just penny poker high stakes, dangerous people. I sat back, stunned. Charles, the careful businessman who prided himself on building stable homes for wealthy families, was gambling. Are you saying he ran? I asked quietly. Victor shrugged. Maybe someone made him disappear. His voice dropped lower. But don't be fooled by your sister. She knew more than she let on. Charles told me once if anything ever happened to him, Marlene would make sure she got hers, no matter the cost. The words gnawed at me all night. If Marlene had known about Charles's gambling, then her sudden spree of selling assets made sense. She wasn't just grieving, she was cashing out before anyone else could lay claim. But something about her behavior didn't sit right. There was a confidence to her actions, a boldness. As though she wasn't afraid of him coming back. As though she already knew he never would. I started paying closer attention. Marlene wasn't careful. She liked to flaunt her new wealth, her shopping bags, her remodels, her trips to spa resorts. One afternoon, while visiting her under the guise of checking on her, I noticed a stack of documents on her desk. When she left the room to take a call, I slid one toward me. It was a transfer receipt from Charles's offshore account, dated 3 days after he disappeared. My heart raced. His signature looked shaky, almost forced, but there it was. The account had been emptied into another account with Marlene's name on it. I left her house trembling. Had she forged his signature? Or had Charles himself been alive long enough to move the money before something happened to him? The more I uncovered, the more I realized my sister wasn't the woman I thought I knew. She had always been reckless, but this was something darker. And the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. One night I came home to find my back door ajar. My kitchen drawers were open, papers scattered. Nothing of value was missing, except my notebook, the one where I had written everything I discovered about Charles's disappearance and Marlene's spending. That was when I knew someone was watching me. Fear clawed at my chest, but so did determination. I wasn't just doing this for Charles anymore. I was doing it for myself for every time Marlene had belittled me, taken advantage of me, and treated me like the boring older sister who played by the rules. This time, I would outsmart her. I decided to test her. The next time we met for lunch, I casually mentioned the police told me they found new evidence about Charles. Something in his office safe. I kept my eyes on my salad, pretending disinterest. Marlene froze, her fork suspended midair. What kind of evidence? She asked too quickly. Oh, I don't know, I lied smoothly. They weren't specific. She forced a laugh, but her hand trembled as she reached for her glass. That night, I drove past Charles's old office building. Sure enough, the security guard told me someone had tried to break into his private office after hours. They hadn't succeeded, but the attempt was obvious. My bait had worked. Piece by piece, the puzzle was forming. Marlene wasn't just hiding money, she was hiding something much bigger. Then came the twist I never expected. A call from a woman named Angela. She introduced herself as Charles's mistress. My stomach turned at the word, but her voice was broken, trembling. She told me Charles had visited her the night before he vanished. He had been terrified, saying someone was after him. He pressed a flash drive into her hands, telling her to keep it safe. And then he never came back. Angela admitted she had been too scared to say anything to the police, afraid her own name would be dragged through scandal. But after months of silence, guilt had eaten her alive. She wanted me to have the flash drive. When I held it in my hands, I felt the weight of everything. Inside were files, bank statements, transaction histories, even secret recordings of conversations between Charles and Marlene. In one, his voice cracked with fear. If I disappear, it's because of her. Don't let her win. My world tilted on its axis. My own sister, my flesh and blood. But betrayal, I learned, is also a strange kind of fuel. I wasn't going to crumble under it this time. I was going to use it. The lesson life had taught me over and over was simple. You can survive almost anything if you're willing to keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. I copied the files, securing backups in multiple places. Then I went to the police. But here's the thing about small-town departments. They move slowly, carefully, sometimes too carefully. If Marlene caught wind of my actions, she'd find a way to twist it all back on me. I had to play the long game, so I smiled at her when we saw each other. I let her think I was exhausted, broken, giving up. But behind the scenes, I was setting a trap, and when it finally snapped shut, would change everything. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because the night I caught my sister in her own lies is a night I will never forget. It's where the real revenge began. I've always believed that time reveals character. When things are calm, when life is steady, people can hide behind smiles and Sunday greetings. But when pressure builds, when secrets start to leak, true faces come to light. That was what I was counting on with Marlene, the day after I received the flash drive from Angela. I walked through my house in silence, clutching a mug of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. I felt older than my 58 years. My reflection in the window showed tired eyes, hair I hadn't bothered to style, shoulders hunched with the weight of betrayal. But beneath that weariness, a fire burned. I had been underestimated my whole life by Marlene, by Charles, by nearly everyone who assumed I was too cautious. It's ordinary. They were wrong. I needed to draw her out to make her believe she still had the upper hand. So I invited her over. She arrived in a gleaming new car, red leather seats, perfume clouding the air before she even walked in. She kissed my cheek with practiced sweetness, but her eyes darted around my living room, scanning for something. Maybe she wondered if I had hidden evidence here. I thought we could go through some of Charles's old things together. I told her, leading her toward a box I had set on the table. Inside were harmless papers, photographs, receipts, letters. But at the bottom, I slipped in a folded piece of paper. On it, I'd written just 3 words. The police know. I pretended not to notice when she saw it. Her hand brushed the note, her face drained of color, and she quickly shoved the box lid shut. Too many memories, she murmured, forcing a smile. But I saw the fear flicker behind her eyes. That night, I followed her. She drove fast, her headlights cutting through the dark back roads until she pulled into Charles's old office building. I parked far enough away and watched as she slipped inside with a small flashlight. For nearly an hour, I sat there, heart pounding, while shadows moved across the windows. When she finally emerged, she looked rattled, clutching something to her chest. The next morning, my phone rang. An unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice hissed, "Stay out of this. Ellen, you don't know who you're dealing with." Then the line went dead. My blood ran cold, but instead of scaring me off, it steeled my resolve. Whoever Marlene was tangled up with, gamblers, criminals, Maybe worse, they had underestimated me, too. I wasn't walking away. The police were slow, yes, but I wasn't powerless. I still had the flash drive, and I still had my voice. So I started gathering allies. Victor, the business partner who had warned me about Charles's debts, agreed to testify about shady dealings. Angela, though nervous, swore she would speak up if it came to trial. Piece by piece, I was building a case not just in the legal sense, but in the court of truth. Still, Marlene kept up her mask in public. At family gatherings, she laughed too loudly, wore dresses too bright for the occasion, pretended grief in rehearsed sighs. But every now and then, I'd catch her watching me with suspicion, as if trying to measure how much I knew. And then, one evening, the mask cracked. We were at a dinner hosted by mutual friends. She was sipping wine when someone casually asked Marlene, "Have the police found anything new about Charles?" Her hand trembled, spilling red liquid across the tablecloth. For a second, she froze, then quickly dabbed at it with a napkin. But her eyes met mine across the table, wide and filled with panic. That was when I knew she was unraveling. I decided to push harder. I left a copy of one of the recordings from the flash drive in her mailbox with no note. Just Charles's trembling voice saying, "If I disappear, it's because of her." The next morning, she showed up at my door, pale, shaking, mascara smeared. "Ellen," she whispered, "we need to talk." I let her in, heart hammering, but I kept my face calm. She sat on my couch, twisting her hands, eyes darting everywhere but at me. "You don't understand," she said finally. "Charles wasn't who you thought he was. He owed people, dangerous people. I had no choice. I had to protect myself." I leaned forward slowly. "Did you protect yourself, Marlene? Or did you protect his money?" Her head snapped up, eyes blazing. "Don't you judge me," she hissed. "You've never had to fight the way I have. You've always played it safe, lived in your little bubble. Do you know what it's like to look at your husband and realize he might drag you down with him? To realize you'll lose everything unless you act first?" The air between us felt electric. In that moment, she wasn't the sister I grew up with. She was a stranger who had crossed a line she could never uncross, but I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "Marlene, the truth always comes out. It's only a matter of time." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sat there in silence, my whole body trembling. For the first time, she had confessed, not in exact words, but enough. Enough for me to know she had been complicit in Charles's disappearance, whether directly or indirectly. And yet, I also knew this: she was dangerous now. Cornered animals lash out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow outside the window made me tighten my grip on the baseball bat I had placed by my bed. But even through the fear, I reminded myself this was the test of everything I had learned in life. Betrayal didn't have to break me. It could sharpen me, prepare me, give me the wisdom to turn the tables. And I was ready. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because what happened next the night, my sister tried to silence me once and for all proved just how strong I had become. The night after Marlene's visit, I barely slept. I sat upright in bed, listening to the wind whip against the shutters, clutching the baseball bat tighter than I'd ever clutched anything in my life. I thought back to when I was a girl, hiding under the covers during thunderstorms, whispering prayers that the house wouldn't shake apart. That same fear lived inside me again, but now it wasn't thunder I feared. It was my own sister. By morning, I forced myself up, made coffee, and tried to eat. But every bite of toast turned to sawdust in my mouth. My nerves were raw, my stomach knotted. Around 9 o'clock, the phone rang again. I froze, then picked up, silence, and then a voice, low and sharp. "Stop digging, Ellen, or you'll end up just like him." My hands shook as I set the phone down. But then something happened, something I didn't expect. Instead of caving to fear, I felt a spark ignite. They thought threats would scare me. They thought I'd fold. But I'd lived long enough to know one thing: when you stand your ground, bullies often reveal themselves. That day, I went to the police again. I handed over the flash drive, the anonymous threats, and the story of Marlene's near confession. They took notes, faces serious, but I could tell they still hesitated. Without hard physical evidence, they couldn't move forward. I left the station with my fists clenched, furious at the slowness of justice. But I wasn't giving up. Instead, I hatched a plan of my own. Marlene had always prided herself on being clever, but I knew her weakness, her greed. If I dangled the right bait, she wouldn't be able to resist. So I called her the next evening. My voice was calm, steady, almost kind. "Marlene," I said, "I think we've been at odds for too long. Why didn't you come over tomorrow? I want to settle things. I want us to find peace." There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "Peace." Her voice sounded wary, but beneath it, I caught a flicker of eagerness. "What do you mean?" I continued. "I have something that belonged to Charles. Something valuable. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to family. I thought you should have it." Another pause. I could practically hear her calculating. "Tomorrow then?" she said finally. When I hung up, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The trap was set. The next day, I called Detective Harris, the one officer I trusted, and told him everything. I explained how I'd invited her, how I'd lured her with the promise of something valuable. He listened carefully. "We can have a team nearby," he said. "But Ellen, you need to understand, if she's dangerous, this could get ugly fast." "I understand," I told him, "but I can't live like this any longer. It's time for the truth to come out." That night, I set the stage. I placed an old jewelry box on the dining table. Inside it, a folder of documents, copies of Charles's fraudulent accounts, the recordings from the flash drive, and one crisp note. "This ends tonight at exactly 8 o'clock. Headlights swept across my driveway." Marlene stepped out of her car wearing a sleek black coat, her lips painted a shade too dark. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who thought she was still in control. "Ellen," she said smoothly as I opened the door. "You look tired." "I've been busy," I replied. Motioning her inside, her eyes flicked immediately to the jewelry box on the table. "Is that it?" "Why don't you sit down first?" I said, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into a chair. Her hands twitched with impatience. "What is this game you're playing?" "No game," I answered. "I just wanted you to have the chance to come clean." One last time, her expression hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do." I slid the box toward her. "Open it." She lifted the lid. For a split second, her face lit up with expectations, then froze when she saw the papers. Her breath quickened. "What is this?" "Evidence," I said quietly. "Evidence that Charles didn't just vanish. Evidence that you had a hand in it. And evidence that you tried to take everything that wasn't yours." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." For a long moment, silence filled the room. And then her composure shattered. She lunged across the table, grabbing the folder, her voice rising into a shriek. "You don't understand. He was going to ruin us both. He had debts you couldn't imagine, enemies who wanted him dead. I did what I had to do." The words hung in the air like poison. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to remain calm. "So you admit it?" I said softly. Her eyes widened. She realized too late my phone was recording, sitting innocently by the lamp. And at that moment, the front door burst open. Detectives swarmed in, Harris at the front. "Marlene Davis," he said firmly, "you're under arrest." The look on her face, shock, betrayal, fury, was one I'll never forget. She thrashed, screamed, tried to pull away as they cuffed her hands behind her back. "Ellen, you set me up. You'll regret this." But I just stood there, tears streaming down my face, whispering, "No, Marlene, you'll regret underestimating me." When the door closed behind them, silence fell over the house. I sank into a chair, trembling from head to toe. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. It wasn't over the court battles, the headlines. The whispers from neighbors would all come next. But the hardest part was done. And as I sat there, I thought about what this journey had taught me. That betrayal can come from the people closest to you. that money and greed can poison even blood ties. But more than anything, that strength isn't about muscles or youth, it's about resolve. About refusing to be silenced. I was 58, and for the first time in my life, I truly knew my own power. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. And remember, no matter your age, no matter how dark the betrayal, your wisdom, your courage, your lived experience can turn the tide. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The morning after Marlene's arrest, I woke to a strange stillness in the house. No more late-night calls. No more pounding on the door or shadows in the driveway. Just quiet. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in months, I felt safe enough to breathe deeply. But peace, I quickly learned, was only the beginning. Because when betrayal is dragged out into the light, the world doesn't stay silent. It whispers, it gossips, it judges. And soon enough, my phone started buzzing again, not with threats, this time, but with reporters, neighbors, and even relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted the story of the woman who'd turned in her own sister. I ignored most of the calls. But when the district attorney's office reached out, I had no choice but to answer. They wanted me to testify. They needed me to be the voice that tied Marlene to Charles's disappearance. Without me, the case could crumble. I said yes, of course. But when I hung up, a wave of dread washed over me. I was about to stand in a courtroom in front of strangers and my own family, and say aloud what had nearly destroyed me. The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of paperwork, meetings with detectives, and sleepless nights. Some days I felt strong, other days I questioned everything. Was I betraying Marlene by speaking out? Was there still a piece of me that wanted to protect her, despite everything she had done? I wrestled with those thoughts late into the night. Sometimes I would sit in Charles's old study, running my fingers along the spines of books he never finished reading. His ghost lingered there, not in a haunting way, but as a reminder of how icy secrets rot a family from the inside out. The day of the trial came sooner than I expected. I dressed in a simple navy suit, my hair pulled back, my face bare of makeup. I didn't want glamour. I wanted truth. As I entered the courthouse, flashbulbs went off. Voices called my name. Ellen, did you know your sister was capable of murder? Do you feel guilty? Guilty. That word clung to me like a burr. I lifted my chin, walked past them, and told myself not to break. Inside the courtroom, Marlene sat at the defense table, her hair perfectly styled, her suit pressed, her expression icy calm. When our eyes met, something twisted in my chest. For a split second, I saw the girl she used to be laughing with me in the backyard, running barefoot through the grass. But then I remembered the threats, the lies, the look on her face when she lunged at me. And the illusion shattered. The prosecutor laid out the case, piece by piece. The financial fraud, the staged accounts, the threats, the recording from that night. And then it was my turn. When I walked to the witness stand, my knees shook so hard I thought I might collapse. But once I sat down, once I looked out across that room and saw the jury watching me, something shifted. I wasn't just Ellen anymore. I was every woman who had ever been silenced. Every widow who had been underestimated. Every sister who had been betrayed. I told the truth about the anonymous calls, about the flash drive, about Marlene's confession in my dining room. My voice trembled at first, but then it grew steady, like a river finding its course. Marlene's lawyer tried to break me. He sneered, suggested I was bitter, jealous, maybe even unstable. But I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Sir, I've lived 58 years. I've raised children, buried a husband, and built a life from the ground up. I know what betrayal looks like. And I know my sister's voice when she admits what she did." The courtroom went silent. Even Marlene didn't look at me. When the trial finally ended, the jury deliberated for hours that felt like days. I sat outside the courtroom, clutching a tissue in one hand and my rosary beads in the other. And when the bailiff finally announced the verdict, guilty, Anno Counsai felt my entire body sag with relief. Marlene was sentenced to decades in prison. I watched her as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. But I also saw something else, a flash of blame, as if she still thought this was my fault, as if she had been the victim all along. Walking out of that courthouse, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Justice had been served, yes, but the cost was immense. My family was shattered, our name forever tied to scandal, and yet deep down, I knew I had done the only thing I could. In the months that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. I started small gardening, baking, joining a book club at the library. I learned the value of ordinary routines after months of chaos. Slowly, I began to find joy again. But then something unexpected happened. Women from my community, widows, single mothers, even young women starting out began reaching out to me. They had seen the news. They had heard my story, and they wanted advice. One woman said, "Ellen, I don't know how you found the courage. I don't know if I could ever do what you did." And I told her, "You don't know your strength until life demands it. And when it does, you'll surprise yourself." Those conversations sparked something in me. I realized I had more to give, more to share. So I partnered with a local nonprofit and began mentoring women in business and life skills. We met in community centers, sometimes even in my living room. And we talked about everything from handling finances to recognizing toxic relationships. It gave me purpose. It gave me healing. And slowly, the hollow space inside me began to fill with something stronger than grief-resilience. One evening, as I was locking up after a meeting, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass door. My hair was streaked with silver, my face lined with age and experience. But I stood tall, my eyes steady. For the first time, I saw not just Ellen the widow or Ellen the betrayed sister. I saw Ellen the survivor, Ellen the mentor, Ellen the woman who refused to be destroyed. And that's the story I want you to hear tonight. Not because it's easy, not because it's glamorous, but because it's real. Because if you're watching this, maybe you're carrying your own betrayal, your own heartbreak, your own fear, and maybe you're wondering if you can survive it. I'm here to tell you, you can. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. And remember this, wisdom is the gift of years, and it will save you when everything else falls apart. Betrayal can wound you, but it cannot define you unless you let it. I didn't let it, and neither should you. I thought the trial would be the end of it. That after Marlene's sentencing, after the courtroom closed and the headlines died down, I could tuck everything away in some dark drawer of memory and start over. But life doesn't move in neat chapters, it bleeds. Even months later, I still found myself waking in the night to echoes of her voice. That cold confession replaying like a broken record. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for the phone, wanting to call her like I used to before everything unraveled. That's the curse of betrayal. You grieve the person who hurt you even while you hate them. But each morning, when the sun slipped through my curtains and the coffee bubbled in the pot, I reminded myself I was still here, still standing. And I had a choice to let that darkness consume me or to use it as fuel. So I threw myself into the mentorship work. At first, it was just a handful of women sitting around my dining table, clutching notebooks and cups of tea. We'd talk about their struggles: an abusive partner, a failed business, a family that dismissed their dreams. I'd listen, nod, share pieces of my own story. And as I watched their shoulders relax, their eyes light up with recognition, I realized this was bigger than me. Word spread. Soon the group grew too large for my house, so we moved to the community center. Local newspapers started writing little pieces about the widow who fought back and how she was now helping others do the same. At first, I hated the spotlight, but then I thought maybe it was exactly where I was supposed to be. One evening, after a workshop on financial literacy, a young woman named Jessica Lingard, as the others left. She couldn't have been more than 20. With tired eyes and bitten nails, "Ellen," she whispered, "do you really think someone like me could start over?" "Of course I do," I told her. "Why?" She twisted the strap of her bag. "Because my family says I'm a failure. My husband says I'll never be anything without him, and part of me believes it. I reached for her hand. Listen to me. The only person who decides your worth is you. People can strip you of money, titles, even your home, but they can't take away your lessons, your grit, or your will to keep moving. Her eyes filled with tears, and in that moment, I knew every sleepless night, every tear I'd shed, every piece of my life that had been torn apart, it had led me here, to help women like Jessica. Still, healing isn't a straight road. Some days grief ambushed me. Like the afternoon, I passed a bakery that Charles and I used to visit. I stepped inside, ordered our favorite lemon tart, and sat alone at a little corner table. For a moment, I let myself cry quietly into the napkin. But then I smiled, because for the first time in a long while, the memory didn't cut MIT comforted me. By the second year, the nonprofit approached me. They wanted me to join their board to expand our reach, to create programs statewide. I laughed at first. I was just a retired school teacher who'd stumbled into advocacy by accident. But they insisted. Ellen, women listen to you because you've lived it. You're not just talking theory. You're living proof. So I said yes. And suddenly I was flying to conferences, giving talks, meeting women from across the country who carried their own stories of betrayal and resilience. One night, after a particularly long day of meetings, I returned to my hotel room and collapsed on the bed. The city lights glittered outside my window. I thought about how far I'd come from that terrified woman who once shook on a witness stand. It struck me then, I hadn't just survived betrayal, I'd transformed it into something unshakable. But fate wasn't done testing me. 3 years after Marlene's sentencing, I received a letter. From prison, her handwriting on the envelope stopped me cold. I almost threw it away, but curiosity gnawed at me. Inside, she wrote, "Ellen, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I envy you. You built something out of this while I rotted in here. You were always the stronger sister. Maybe I hated you for that. Maybe I still do. But sometimes I just miss us." I sat there for hours, staring at the letter, torn between fury and sorrow. Did I write back? Did I give her the satisfaction of knowing she still occupied space in my mind? In the end, I didn't. Some doors once closed should stay that way. But I kept the letter, not as a token of her, but as a reminder of what I'd survived. Of the line I had drawn, of the power of choice, and life, as it always does, moved forward. My group grew into a movement. We called it Second Sunrise, because that's what it felt like for all of us. Waking up after a long night and realizing the lights still belonged to us, we opened small businesses together, bakeries, thrift shops, even a landscaping company run by women who'd never been given a chance. We weren't just rebuilding our own lives. We were stitching together a safety net for others. One of my proudest moments came the day Jessica, the same young woman who once thought she was worthless, stood up in front of a crowd of 200 and said, "Because of Ellen, I believed in myself again. And now I own my own business." I cried right there on stage, and I didn't care who saw. Now, as I sit here at 61 telling you this story, I want you to understand something. The betrayals we face don't define us. It's how we rise after them that shapes our legacy. My sister tried to silence me, to destroy me, but all she did was force me to become louder, stronger, and more determined than I ever thought possible. And maybe you're sitting there tonight watching this, feeling broken. Maybe someone you loved hurt you. Maybe you lost everything you thought you couldn't live without. I know what that feels like. But I also know this: you are more capable than you believe. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. And remember, you are not weak for being betrayed. You are powerful for surviving it. I survived my sister's greed. I built something new from the ashes. And so can you, because betrayal didn't end me. It began me.